Hi all. Since there's so much interest still in Fischer's My 60 Memorable Games book, I decided to try and construct a playlist. So if you look at my playlists, it's something I've been getting into recently, and I already have some Fischer dedicated playlists, but I have started now My 60 Memorable Games for him. And Majnu and Fat and Mad are a couple of videos I've also highlighted, so they're great chess annotators. And I'm going to look at now Petrosian versus Fischer, which was called Bear Hug from Fischer's Memorable Games. So Petrosian kicked off with c4, and Fischer played into his King's Indian defence. But this is the fianchetto variation, so White is playing very solidly and positionally. It's difficult for Black to get a good kingside attack going here because it's, you know, extra solid around White's king. But we'll see that Fischer did play for f5 nonetheless. So after knight h5 d4, so that's interesting already. That it's almost as if, you know, Petrosian's tricked Fischer by playing d4 very slowly into kind of committing to this knight h5. It might be misplaced now. After e5 d5 knight e7, Petrosian plays e4, just allowing Fischer, you know, this natural f5. So Fischer plays it, but after ef Gf, you know, it seems there's this tactical liability that Fischer's left on purpose. Every Russian schoolboy knew that you shouldn't really take back here with a piece. So knight takes f5 is dangerous anyway for losing a piece here with g4. But actually here g4 doesn't quite win a piece because of knight d4. And maybe, you know, Black is able to hold this because bishop g4 here and a very annoying pin on f3. So Rybka's actually giving a queen sacrifice here, with White having apparently a theoretical advantage. But so this is a very interesting variation indeed. But actually after rook takes f2, it might be changing its mind. But aside from that very tactical variation with g4, if knight takes f5 g4, if we take with the bishop, here is a classic position where White, if he can get control of this e4 square of a piece, and Black's lost the f5 pawn, then this position is going to be better for White. For example, you know, like this, a big knight on e4 statistically is going to win games in the King's Indian. So this is part of the reason why Fischer was more interested in this other continuation with just g takes f5, allowing this idea of knight takes e5. So Petrosian plays knight takes e5, and we see now that the knight can't be captured because of queen takes h5 and Black's a pawn down for nothing. So Fischer does a move knight takes g3. But after hg, bishop takes e5, I think, you know, White's positioning better here. So why is this described as a bear hug? I think already there are signs this is going to be quite painful for Black positioning, because we have this pawn on the semi-open file. This is an isolated pawn, so both of these pawns are isolated, and f4 is a great square for White to sort of clamp down on. The dark squared bishop is easy to exchange off with bishop e3 to d4, so Black will end up with weaker, darker squares. So we're going to see this all in action now. First f4, and after bishop g7, bishop e3. So White's going to trade off those dark squared bishops. And now, after knight g6, rook e1, you know, this pawn on f4 and g3, they deprive the knight of going anywhere useful, like the e5 square in particular. So Fischer plays rook f7, but now after bishop f3, White's also preparing, say, king g1 and rook h1 to, you know, mount an attack on this isolated pawn. And potentially the h5 square is also going to be good for a rook, potentially, to attack this pawn as well. So queen f8, king f2, making way for rook h1. After rook e8, exchange of rooks, and now the dark squares will weaken a bit. Queen d4. So the queen's in the dominating square. So Petrosian's really able to improve all his pieces now. Rook h1. So Fischer's pawn structure is really under fire here. Knight d1. The knight improves as well, just from seemingly not doing much on c3. If it comes to e3, targeting f5. So Fischer's really tied down here. The bear grip is increasing, but how will Petrosian break through? Fischer seemingly plays a grovelly move just to trade off queens, but it does relieve the dark square pressure. After a3, it seems now Petrosian's plan, now that his pieces are quite optimal, attacking Fischer's liabilities, is to play for b4 and c5, maybe use the a file to try and get 7th rank pressure. So this kind of plan, if it can be achieved, first with b4. So we see this plan in action, but first the bishop improves itself because it's more aggressive on d3 attacking f5. So we can see clearly now that the bear grip theme is evidenced here. So after rook h5, all of white's pieces are really putting fire on black's pawns and pressure. Bishop e8 evicting the rook though. So Petrosian is going to use the rook on the a file now. He's first, although, improved his knight again. So not only attacking f5 but also eyeing these squares. So it's very nicely centrally placed. Beautiful positional play by Petrosian. So no wonder he's one of the strongest world champions in history, and he had a distinct positional style, and he had great results even against Kasparov. So king g6, rook a1. So the rook is now being used on this 7th row. So why couldn't Fischer have contested that after, say, AB rook a8? Well, if rook a8 here, there was bishop takes f5. So basically Fischer had to protect with king g6 his f5 square. So after rook a1, Fischer's under more sort of pressure now with this rook on the 7th coming in. Well, eventually rook on the 7th now. So c5 was played as a temporary pawn sack. Maybe this wasn't the best way to exploit the great position Petrosian is in now. Rybka gives bishop c2 with a slight advantage to white on a sort of, or knight e6 now on a slightly deeper depth. So the way it was played, c5, and it seems now after d takes c, knight f3, yes, the knight's got a great e5 square because white's undermined the control of e5. So we now have a further simplification with knight takes d7, bishop takes f5. So Petrosian is basically heading for this ending where these pawns are going to be more important than black's double pawns potentially, especially if white can pick up h6. So after g4, again c7's on the fire, so Fischer protects it, and now bishop takes d7, king e3. So it seems white's got the better pawn structure, but the position now, according to Rybka, is actually virtually equal. So it seems, although black's position doesn't look that healthy with these double pawns, the speed of black's c pawn here is leading to a drawn position technically. So here are the moves, the remaining moves, where white now sacrifices the rook and prepares f6, but here a draw was offered and accepted. So let's have a look why. How would this draw? Well, say rook takes, and now king b1, f8 queen, c2, queen f5, king b2, and here it's a draw basically, because how can white progress? White can't really progress. So basically that was a very tight squeeze that white exerted. Let's have a quick overview of it now. So the fianchetto variation of the King's Indian defence, and Fischer allowing this knight takes e5. So white had some positional trumps here especially the H file and control of the key dark squares like E5 and G5, and it seems he was just improving and improving his pieces to exert more and more pressure on black's F5 and H7. So the bishop and knights became kind of optimal, and then white started to play on the queen side, so invading with his rook, but it still wasn't enough. Fischer was somehow resourceful enough to be able to defend the position and use his c-pawns to gain a technically drawn position. I hope you enjoyed that. Please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.